conversation between myself and Professor Tanure Ojaide. He wants me to call him just Tanure Ojaide, but that's hard to do. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Congratulations again for being shortlisted for the Nigerian Prize. How was it like to hear the news?
Well, I was always delighted for one's work to be recognized. So it's a pleasure, and I'm happy.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that you were longlisted and then that you were shortlisted?
Yeah, I was just in my home in Ilorin. So yeah, I got a phone call that was in the long list at that time. The same thing in the short list. Yeah.
And what did you think the first time you had the short list in this case?
One is getting closer, closer to the big thing.
Yeah. What observations have you found about living in Ilorin, different from other places you've lived?
I think for me, as a poet, every new environment has its own form of inspiration. You know, I once lived in Maiduguri for almost 10 years, and I recognized the type of poetry I wrote at that time. Mm-hmm. I lived in Amasoma, in the Niger Delta, and some of the poems are, in fact, in songs of myself. Mm-hmm. As I told eminent professor recently, that there were cultural practices in the past of my people, the Robo people, marrying their daughters who were accused of witchcraft into Ijaw areas, and they flourished there. And I felt a poet needs to write about this type of thing. So each environment, and in Ilorin, I feel I'm in the savannah, and when you look at a majority Yoruba place, with Fulani, an emirate place, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Christians, peaceful, people who don't fight because of religion. I think it gives you reason to think. And I've done a series of poems I call the Savannah Suite, which is my new type of poetry.
I read that you, on the back of this book, it says you have 17 collections, but elsewhere I read you have about 20 collections of poetry. How many have you written?
Maybe I'm like a man who has so many children. Now, about 20 collections of poetry.
Whoa. Yeah. Has poetry always been the medium of choice for you?
I would think so. Yeah, because as I was writing poetry very young, I was raised by my grandmother, who used to sing songs, these Uje songs to me. Uje, the traditional form of satiric poetry in Robo. And later when I went to school, I felt there was very little difference between the songs she sang to me and the poems I read. So I started writing. Even as a student in Federal Government College, Warri, we posted our writings on the board. I used to post poems. And by the time I went to Ibadan, yeah, there was a lot of vitality.
How old were you in those?
Maybe about 19, 20, 21. Yeah.
So when was your first collection published?
My first collection was published as far back, you won't believe it, 1973. Ooh. I should have been about 22 years. Most of those poems were written at Ibadan as a student.
What do you think has changed in your own evolution of your poetic voice?
Also, sometimes I feel that the artist, whether literary or otherwise, should leave his or her work to critics to talk about. But of course, as one matures, you expect the writing also to mature. I'll be more exposed. See, as a young person of 22, 23, just living to Ibadan, I didn't know much about human nature. As you get older, if you could see like in this book, Songs of Myself, the first poem is the persona of a sage, somebody who is wiser about the world, who can talk about wisdom. So there's a big difference between a young person and an older person. And that could be the difference.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
When you were speaking earlier, you spoke about Uje, which is a traditional Yoruba form of poetry. And at the beginning, the first poem you mentioned here also had this call and response type. Is it the onomatopoeic response?
Yeah.
So, how have you tried over the years to incorporate that form into your work, and how has the response been to people who don't have any idea about that form of poetry?
Yes. First of all, I have to explain that Ojaide, I think, is one of the most poetic oral performance traditions in Africa. And it's a pity that the tradition is dying off, so to say. And what I'm trying to do is to modernize it, put it in a different way. Since I write in English, I take a lot of the aesthetics from Ojaide into my poetry. So what I'm doing, when you look at it, highly poetic, highly, and it's a poetry which tends to have a communal response. It draws you into what it's saying, and it helps to see on the poetic side. It's had a lot of images, strong images, and strong lines. So I've learned a lot from Ojaide that, see, when you write poetry, it's not so much, you should write what people will understand. Not just the beauty of the poetry, but also poetry that could help to make things better than they were before I started writing. Yeah.
You also talk about it as being a poem used to criticize oneself as a way of criticizing the society.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, yes. In fact, that's why I call it songs of myself. See, in the Yoruba tradition, if you are going to be a performer, a singer, and you are going to criticize others, see, you are seen as somebody who can change society for the good. And if you put yourself in that position, you have to purge yourself of even your own negative practices. How do I criticize Nigeria or the Nigerian leader without criticizing myself? So the aim is to really purge yourself of your own impurities before you have the authority, the ethical or moral authority to criticize others. And so songs of myself really, even if you don't criticize yourself, you create a persona in which there are weaknesses. See, no human being is perfect. We all criticize our leaders. But even those of us who criticize are also guilty of certain things. So you could see in the beginning, that part of the poem, I tried to criticize myself as weak in so many things before I criticize the society in which I live.
So, the book itself, when did you start writing it?
It took me quite some time. You know, I publish almost every 2 years. This might have taken about 4 years. I was writing some things before, but later on they fell into a pattern. I felt I could write. You see the 4 sections. The first section, also in the Ojaide tradition, you have to encourage yourself, pay homage to the gods of poetry, and then you sing about yourself, you criticize society. In a way, it took me some time, but it fell into place that I feel I can use a modern medium to revitalize an old tradition, which was highly poetic. And I'm a small poet compared to the great poets of Ojaide. Yeah.
Okay. How often do you write?
I'm a compulsive writer. Yeah. So it's part of my life. And I feel people enjoy doing things. For me, writing is something I enjoy doing. And in fact, I could wake in the night and start writing. My wife could tell you that, or other people. Okay. But it's something that when inspiration comes, I obey it. And I write often.
From your experience of the work you've done in criticizing the Niger Delta, for instance, or Nigeria as a whole, what has been the result from the people who read your work? Do you think that poetry, do you think art has had the impact you assume it will, you know, as a writer?
I remember as far back as the 70s and the 80s, people talk about poems I wrote about the soldiers fighting the war and the generals receiving the recognition. And many of the poems, I have a poem here on people who are so much carried away by this European soccer that you go to offices, that's all they look at. But they never think of our own culture. Those people don't think about us. They will not even allow us to visit their country. But people here are ready to die for them, whether in Calabar or anywhere, to die for Arsenal. So literature, and whenever I read and people see me, yes, they talk about these things. And the mere fact that it's part of the intellectual discussion or discourse, it helps to shape the minds of people. It's a form of enlightenment. And it may not be take the form of a physical revolution that we see, but minds are changing, and I think changing for the better. We are becoming better human beings the more literature we read, whether it's my poetry or other people's poetry.
What do you think of this argument that us writing poetry in English alone, no matter how much we try to adapt it to traditional forms, is helping only English and not the languages we speak?
The decision to write in English is something which is strategic. See, I've decided to write in English, and I'll be writing in English. I read in places like, as far as Medellin in Colombia, New Delhi in India, in Rotterdam, in Canada, United States, and my poetry in English reaches them firsthand, directly. So I don't think, I don't just allow me to write in what I can write in. I write in Yoruba once in a while, but my major medium of writing is in English. But there's a subtext of what I call Panedo culture in my writing. A lot of Benin myths, Yoruba myths, all in the poetry, which I weave into the Niger Delta experience. And it works.
But are you worried about the perception that you being an important writer of that culture, not writing or giving back to the language in a way that helps the language survive, might end up hurting the language in the long run?
No, I'm not worried in that way. Please take note, there are many Englishes. Yeah. The English I write in, it's not American English. It's not British English, it's not Australian. See, this is specifically almost Nigerian English. In fact, if I were to read a poem, I'll read one to you in Pidgin English, which is lingua franca of the Niger Delta. So I don't feel guilty not writing all the time in Yoruba. I don't have that proficiency in writing in Yoruba as I have in English. And also, apart from that, some people write in Yoruba, some write in Yoruba. They have a big tradition of Yoruba, writing in Hausa, for instance, I'm aware of. So those who are very good at that can do that, but it should be the individual writer's choice and not something that one should feel guilty about. I feel very comfortable that I'm able to project this Panedo Yoruba culture in my writing.
You used to publish a lot outside the country before publishing in Nigeria, but since 3 books now, you said you have published first in Nigeria before publishing abroad. What informed that decision?
I first published outside. If you look at my first collection, Children of Iroko, far back, it was published in the United States. My next book, The Eagle's Vision, The Endless Song, they were all published abroad before I started publishing here. My next book is going to be published simultaneously here and the United States. So I feel I owe more to my homeland than outside. And that's my main, and in fact, if you go through universities now, so many people writing master's or PhD thesis on my work, and very few outside. I know they are doing that in the United States and a few other places. But since this is my main base, my homeland, I feel I should be read first here. And if you have a talent, you should be exposed first in your place. Let others buy it from your homeland.
If you don't win the prize this year, which of the other writers on the shortlist do you think might win it? Or do you think should win it?
Again, see, you are talking to somebody older than you. See, but I always feel I've won so many prizes.
Yes, you have.
And see, I have trust in the jury.
Yes.
If I have trust in the jury, I feel whichever book they feel best qualifies for the strong poetry they want should win it. It could be mine, it could be any of the other two. And I won't be specific. But may the best book, the one they consider the best book, win. And I will congratulate the person. If it's me, I expect them to congratulate me. But I'm an optimist. Yes. So I want the best one to win.
Yes. The book is The Song of Myself. I enjoyed reading it a lot, and I want to thank you for coming, and I thank you for writing the book.
Thank you very much. Thank you.